I remember the courtroom smell of old paper and polish when he said it, smiling like advice. I believed him then, or pretended to. Years later, I built my firm quietly, case by case, learning how power hides in footnotes and deadlines. He never called. Then an application crossed my desk with his letterhead, asking for partnership, access, mercy dressed as strategy. No apology, just assumptions. The law teaches you to read what isn't written, to notice who signs last, who benefits, who bleeds slowly. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. Some wrongs aren't loud. They're procedural. This isn't about money or winning in court. It's about timing records and the patience to let someone argue themselves into a corner they don't see. Silence can be leverage when you know exactly which rules apply. I smiled, stamped received, and wondered, how long before he realizes who's deciding his future? I grew up in conference rooms and quiet corners of courthouses, the kind of childhood where adults spoke in lowered voices and coffee was always burnt. My father liked to say the law was in my blood, then laugh as if it were a joke I didn't understand. He was already a partner by the time I could read, already respected, already certain of the shape his life would take. I was simply there, his daughter, carrying his last name, watching men shake his hand like it meant something solid. At home, he corrected my grammar the way other parents corrected posture. Precision mattered. Tone mattered. Emotion was a liability. When I told him at 16 that I wanted to be a lawyer too, he didn't raise his voice. He smiled, tired and indulgent, and said, "You'll never be a real lawyer. You don't have the temperament." Then he went back to reading a brief conversation over. I learned early how to make myself small around him. I learned how to listen without reacting, how to file away moments that didn't feel important at the time. I went to law school anyway. I paid for it myself. We didn't talk much during those years, and when we did, he asked about my grades the way someone asks about the weather, out of habit, not interest. When I graduated, he didn't come. He sent flowers with a card signed by his assistant. My firm didn't begin with a name anyone recognized. It began with a second-hand desk, a single window, and clients who found me because no one else would take them. I worked longer hours than I admitted to anyone. I learned how to survive on little sleep and less praise. I learned how to read people when they thought they were in control. They were in control. Slowly, cases turned into wins. Wins turned into referrals. I hired one assistant, then another. We moved offices. The window faced the river this time. I built a routine around calm. Morning coffee, files reviewed before anyone else arrived, a walk at lunch to clear my head. Control came from consistency. I didn't need to prove anything anymore, or so I told myself. My father's name still carried weight in the city. His firm was old, established, unshakable. I saw it on billboards in trade publications, etched onto plaques at charity events. We existed in the same profession like parallel lines, never touching, never acknowledged. That distance felt safer. On a Tuesday afternoon, between a deposition and a client call, my assistant placed a folder on my desk. She didn't say anything at first, just hovered a moment longer than usual. The letterhead was thick, expensive, familiar. It came through the general inbox, she said carefully. Addressed to you. I waited until she left before opening it. The office was quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on your ears. Tue. Inside was a formal application. Polite language, confident assumptions, carefully neutral phrasing. His firm was seeking a professional arrangement. Access, collaboration, opportunity. My father's signature was at the bottom. I closed the folder and sat there, staring at my own reflection in the glass of the window, feeling something old and steady tighten in my chest. I didn't respond right away. I filed the application where I put things that required thought, not reaction. For days, it sat there between client contracts and court notices, pretending it belonged. I went back to my routine. Coffee, emails, meetings where people looked at me and listened. I let the normal weight of my life press back into place, but his name has gravity. It pulls at memory whether you invite it or not. That week, my mother called for the first time in months. She asked how work was going, the way she always did, carefully neutral, as if my answer might detonate something fragile between us. I told her I was busy. She hesitated, then said she'd seen my firm mentioned in a legal journal. Her voice held something like pride, quickly smoothed over. She didn't mention my father. She never did unless I did first. At the office, my senior associate asked if I'd be attending the regional bar gala that weekend. Dad's firm usually sponsors, she said without thinking. I nodded and said I wasn't sure yet. I watched her face for any sign of recognition, of connection. There was none. To her, he was just another name in the industry. To me, he was a history I'd learned to carry quietly. I reread the application late one night alone. The language was impeccable. No requests, only expectations shaped like options. They framed the arrangement as mutually beneficial, a natural alignment of interests. Not once did it acknowledge how unusual it was for a firm like his to apply to one like mine. Not once did it acknowledge me. There was no note attached, no personal message, no call. I thought about the last time we'd been in the same room. A courthouse hallway years ago. He'd nodded at me like a colleague he couldn't quite place. Good to see you, he'd said, already turning away. I remembered standing there with my file clutched too tightly, feeling ridiculous for wanting more. The gala came and went. I didn't attend. On Monday morning, an email arrived from his managing partner. Polite follow-up, checking receipt, offering to answer questions. Still nothing from my father himself. It was as if the application had filed itself. I began to notice other things, how often his firm's cases brushed close to mine, how frequently their associates appeared in the same courtrooms, arguing positions that relied on assumptions I knew were fragile. I listened more closely. I asked questions in meetings that seemed casual but weren't. Patterns emerged when I let them. At home, I slept poorly. Not because I was angry, but because something unfinished had surfaced. Injustice doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits patiently, confident it will be overlooked. On Friday afternoon, I finally removed the application from the folder. I placed it on my desk, aligned squarely with the edge, and opened a clean legal pad. Outside, the river moved steadily past the window, indifferent and constant. I picked up my pen, paused and realized my hand wasn't shaking at all. I didn't start by writing a response. I started by reading old filings, recent motions, public records that most people skimmed and forgot. I told myself it was diligence, nothing more. If my firm was going to consider any professional arrangement, I owed it to my clients to understand exactly who I'd be dealing with. That justification felt clean, legal, safe. The deeper I looked, the clearer the shape became. My father's firm had grown fast in the last few years, faster than reputation alone could explain. New offices, new practice areas. Aggressive lateral hires who didn't stay long. I recognized the signs. Expansion that outpaced structure, confidence that assumed correction would come later. It was the kind of growth that looked impressive from the outside and fragile from within. At work, I stayed composed. I chaired meetings, reviewed briefs, reassured nervous clients. No one noticed anything different about me, which I took as proof that I was handling this correctly. Control wasn't about silence, it was about consistency. One afternoon, a junior associate knocked on my door with a question about a conflict check. She was young, sharp, still careful with authority. As she spoke, I realized the name she mentioned was tied to one of my father's firm's major clients. The overlap was minor, easily waived, but it lingered in my mind long after she left. That night, I ran the check myself. The results were interesting, nothing improper, nothing actionable, just enough proximity to require disclosure in certain circumstances, just enough to matter if someone wasn't paying attention. I thought about my father then, not as a symbol, not as an obstacle, but as a man who believed systems bent toward him by default. He taught me that, unintentionally. Rules were tools, process was power. The mistake was assuming only certain people knew how to use them. He still hadn't called. Another email arrived from his managing partner, more direct this time. They were eager to move forward. There were deadlines approaching, opportunities that required timely cooperation. I read it twice and felt a strange, quiet satisfaction at how little it affected me. At dinner with my mother that weekend, she finally mentioned him. "Your father's been busy," she said, stirring her drink. "The firm's under a lot of pressure." I met her eyes. A pressure from what? She hesitated. A growth, she said, and changed the subject. Back at the office on Monday, I scheduled a meeting with my compliance officer. I framed my questions broadly, hypothetically. She answered carefully, professionally, unaware of how closely I was listening. By the end, my understanding was precise. Late that evening, alone again, I opened the application one more time. I traced my father's signature with my eyes. It looked steadier than I remembered his handwriting being, as if someone else had practiced it. For the first time, I considered what it would mean to say yes. I said yes. I said yes. Not immediately. Not eagerly. I sent a measured response from my firm's general address, thanking them for their interest and proposing an initial review meeting. Neutral language, professional warmth, nothing that suggested history. When the confirmation came back less than 10 minutes later, I imagined the relief it must have triggered on their end, assumptions settling back into place. The meeting was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, I prepared the way I always did, quietly, thoroughly, without spectacle. I delegated routine matters so my calendar stayed clear. I reviewed internal policies, refreshed my memory on procedural timelines, flagged areas that required heightened disclosure. None of it was dramatic. That was the point. The most effective moves rarely are. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early. The conference room was orderly, sunlight falling cleanly across the table. I set out water, a lined fold. When my assistant asked if I needed anything else, I shook my head. I was calm in a way that felt earned. They arrived as a group. 3 partners, 2 associates, and my father. He looked older than I remembered, not weaker, just more deliberate, as if time had begun charging interest. When his eyes met mine, there was a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. He smiled and extended his hand like we were meeting for the first time. Good to see you, he said. I took his hand. A thank you for coming. We sat. Introductions were made, roles clarified, agendas displayed. I led the discussion. My voice didn't waver. I asked questions that sounded routine and listened closely to the answers. Around the table, his colleagues spoke with confidence, filling space with certainty. My father spoke last, as he always had. As he talked, I watched him the way I'd learned to watch witnesses, attentive, neutral, patient. He didn't look at me when he made his assurances. He didn't need to. He assumed alignment. At one point, a junior associate from his firm referenced a matter I knew well. Not incorrectly, just incompletely. I noted it without comment. There would be time. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises to follow up. They left looking satisfied. My father lingered a moment, as if considering whether to say something more personal. In the end, he nodded once and followed the others out. I stayed behind. I closed the door, returned to my seat, and opened the folder I'd prepared for myself alone. Inside were notes, timelines, and a single document marked for internal review only. I read it slowly, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it. Outside the window, the river kept moving, steady and indifferent. I thought of that girl in the conference rooms, listening quietly, learning what mattered. I thought of the man who told her she didn't have the temperament. I reached for my pen and made the first notation.